Hello and welcome to another amazing part of What If a Tiefling Were in One Piece? Your Dose of Apple wrote this amazing story. Please support them. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. I want you to know that what you did was completely optional. That was purely your decision and consequence. Well, it wouldn't have been a choice if you two had bucked up and ate some of his, oh divine. Carrie can't continue scolding as she instead upchucks her guts. In general, this has been a terrible week for the warlock's stomach. While Nami continues to rub circles into their second mate's back, Usopp couldn't turn away from the giant smackdown taking place within viewing distance. Usopp points dramatically, turning back to Nami and Carrie. Holmes was less than focused on the bout, with stars in his eyes. Did you see that? They fight to kill, but they're so skilled that they defend just as well as they attack. Yeah, that's great, Usopp. Could you fix Carrie's ponytail? Usopp does just that but doesn't stop rambling. It's like each of them has a flag on his chest that says warrior. And those flags mean more to them than their very lives. Usopp finishes reading Carrie's hair. They refuse to let them be torn off. It's a glorious battle to the death between two real warriors. Exciting stuff, I'm sure, Carrie mutters sarcastically, still wallowing away from where she is slowly coming back to herself. I'm sure I'd like it a lot more if my insides weren't turning inside out. Ugh. Do not throw up again. Nami warns while Usopp goes back to watching. I'm gonna watch a while longer. Usopp decides, folding his arms and watching the show. This is my goal. To be a brave warrior of the sea. I want to be a man of honor like these guys. Nami looks thoughtfully at Usopp, her expression turning a bit more neutral, before she shrugs to herself and plops herself down, leaning against a tree that faces the fight. Well, it'll kill the time at least. Listen, while this does sound riveting, and that isn't said sarcastically, Usopp, I swear. Carrie pushes herself up, distinctly away from the ensuing battle and away from the sight of the T-Rex roast, and cradles her stomach with a wince. I'm going to go somewhere not around that. She throws a thumb behind her shoulder at the vague direction of the meat. Usopp shrugs. Suit yourself, but you're definitely missing the show. Again, his eyes sparkle as he's well and truly enraptured by the showcase of strength and bravery. If there's a whole village of warriors like them, someday I'd like to go there. That's great. Anyways, don't make bad decisions and don't die. Carrie waves her hand loosely and trudges into the jungle. Wait, you're actually leaving us? Well, the awe was gone real fast. What part of what I just said was unclear to you? Trudging through the jungle all on your lonesome for like 30 whole minutes? Don't recommend it. A solid 320 experience. But Carrie had been motivated to get the hells out of sight and scent of that dino meat, and so now she was trudging through the woods with the motivation of a rat wanting to live through another day by any means. She'd shaken Nami and Usopp off her tail after they tried to keep her with them, but the smell of the cooked meat was too strong and her stomach was way too weak right now. Plus she was pissed at them for not bucking up and playing better guests and forcing Carrie into putting on that act in the first place. So it was just better for her mental health if she took some time away from them for now. She could go without the bugs though. Oh, motherf! She swats at another bug that bit her one too many times. She was itchy, warm, and incredibly pissed off. She may be good at getting other people pissed off, but she also had an uncanny talent for making herself pissed off. I hate it here. Carrie shouts into the jungle, grinding her teeth as she crests over one overly large root. She flops bodily atop the wood and just takes a moment to breathe, only to immediately get bit again. Ugh, stupid mosquitoes. At this rate, she half expected a displacer beast to jump out and finish her off. At least it would end her suffering. Getting back up and continuing to trudge, Carrie continues her poor trek, which is quickly shortened as something runs across her path. It might be a very large bug, not that she got a good enough look as she screams so loud that some of the large birds in the area retreat. And unfortunately, due to her stumble, she goes careening down a nearby drop, tumbling and fumbling downwards until she rolls to a stop and stares at the sky in disdain. Before she can kick and scream and just let her general hatred of the scenario show, a head pops into view and immediately captures her attention. Hey bug. Hey Sanji. Carrie's face screws up as she sees Sanji clearly fighting off a smile. We cannot keep meeting like this. Well, I don't know about that. Sanji offers up an arm of which Carrie quickly uses to haul herself up. These little meetups feel like a great gag in a romance novel. Upon getting to her feet and dusting herself off, Carrie immediately blanches and groans in disgust. Ew, dude. Gross. Oh, come on, bug. Carrie looks around, completely ignoring Sanji's apparent pleas. Where are we? Then she remembers a certain other aspect she'd not been addressing. She spun around and poked the cook's chest. And where have you been? Me. Sanji balks. No, the sentient pile of flesh behind you. Who else do you think I'm talking about? Sanji still spares a scant look behind his back because what kind of throw-off was that? Turning back around, Sanji defends, I was finding a bigger piece of meat than Zoro. Carrie suspects there's a joke somewhere in there but can't really bring herself to try and find it. Yeah. And you left? Carrie spins around in a very poor attempt at mimicking Sanji. Poor Nami Swan all by herself. Carrie smacks her chest a few times while holding eye contact. And who do you think was roped into playing White Knight? Usopp. Say goodbye to your cigarettes. Okay. Sanji rapidly waves his arms back and forth to avoid further ire. And instead elects to settle on a simple, well, I'm back to help you now. Oh, now we're important enough to. Carrie pauses in her mini tirade, squinting over Sanji's shoulder in palpable confusion. What is that? Apparently taken by Carrie's abrupt switch in demeanor, Sanji turns around to squint in the same direction as Carrie. Upon finding just the sight of what had her anger pausing, Sanji felt himself tilt his head curiously. There, resting right between a couple of trees not that far away was a little wax-cubed house. Both Carrie and Sanji share very befuddled expressions. Then Sanji starts marching for it. Yet before he could get altogether that far, Carrie latches onto his arm and pulls him to a stop. He spares a confused look back at the warlock who is rooting her feet in the ground in an effort to make Sanji stop and think. What do you think you're doing? Sanji blinks at her, spares a single look to the wax house, and then looks back to Carrie. Were we not going to investigate the wax house? Carrie can't help but stare at Sanji like he's an idiot. Dude, that's the most obvious Fae trap I've ever seen. Hey, what trap? Sometimes Carrie missed having magic as a normal known thing. Carrie lets go of Sanji's arm and makes an overdramatic gesture to the wax house. Fae trap. Something that interests you and gets you snatched up by fairies and your ass gets punted to the Feywild and you lose your name or your favorite color. But forever. Sanji stares at Carrie for an indeterminate amount of time, his cigarette loosely hanging from his lips with a bit of smoke drifting up at a leisurely pace. Fae trap. That is what I said, yes. Fairies. Do I need to repeat myself, a guy? Sanji, no. Sanji starts full tilt sprinting towards the wax house. Swearing up a storm and deciding that any Fae trying to kidnap their idiot cook was going to get a first-class ticket with the end of an eldritch blast, Carrie takes off after Sanji. It isn't long before Carrie is huffing and panting in the threshold of the weird little house and staring at the back of Sanji's hunched-over frame. Screw you, Frycook. Where's the fairies? Sanji asks, looking around in desperate search for the alleged fairies that were claimed to possibly be present. He turns around, a bit of the blood trailing from his nose smudged from when he had apparently attempted to save face before entering. He points at Carrie demandingly, You said there'd be fairies. Do not put words in my mouth, shithead. Carrie dubiously looks around the room, slowly tapping the floor with her toe before creeping into the threshold. When she didn't feel herself go up in flames or get bamfed into some archfae's court, she lets her hackles fall. Okay, looks like we're safe. But you said there'd be fairies. I did not. Carrie takes a deep breath and attempts to calm herself down. In doing so, getting a big waft of wax. She grimaces at the scent and squints around in disdain, only to feel very confused at the odd sights the room brings her. If it is a Fae trap, it must be old, because someone set up shop here. Sanji, finally letting his qualms fall with the unpromised fairies, spares a look around the room. He seemed equally as perplexed by some of the decor, going as far as to frown at the little sitting area with what appeared to be a freshly brewed cup of tea. He stepped up and poured himself a cup. Carrie guffaws at the sight and stalks over to smack his shoulder, scolding, Dude, what if that's poisoned? Well then, congrats. Sanji raises his glass to Carrie expectantly. Your first time doing your new duty as second mate. Carrie glares at Sanji. Sanji makes doe eyes at Carrie. Carrie snatches the teacup and pounds it down like a champ. She smacks her lips a few times while passing the cup back to Sanji. The chef watches and awaits the consensus. Yeah, that's just ginger tea. At least it solved her still slightly upset stomach and washed out her mouth thoroughly. Now satisfied in knowing he had no chance of being poisoned, Sanji pours himself a cup and enjoys the moment. For all of 2 seconds before the pair realized they should actually do some digging. Okay, so if this place isn't a Fae trap, then what is it? Sanji asks as he gets up to inspect the contents of the place alongside Carrie. Both snoop about, poking here and there, peeking at this and that. Just an overall investigation check that unfortunately both failed to roll high enough to succeed at. Just in general. Aha. Sanji pulls back from where he'd been overlooking a little shelf with different spices and tea assortments. What? What is it? Carrie grins and holds up a book. I found a book. Sanji stares at the book for all of 10 seconds. It was very clear that Carrie was attempting to show off her find, but the thing was both upside down and apparently an encyclopedia. There's a familiar confusion and concern that's starting to reroot itself in his head. You do realize that you're holding it upside down, right? Carrie pauses in her brief rejoicing of her discovery to very slowly flip it the correct way around. Her pride now a little awkward and, if Sanji thinks he's seeing it correctly, embarrassed. Those roots go a little deeper. Carrie, do you? Sanji is cut off by someone speaking. Carrie promptly drops her encyclopedia and spins around the house with both hands raised with readied spells. Get ready to taste my arcane fury, whoever you are. Oh my, it's a den mushy, you psycho. Sanji gets up and scouts out the ringing, and catches sight of a little basket tucked away in the corner and away from prying eyes. He flips off the top and immediately spots the little snail phone inside. What the hells is that? Carrie asks in alarm as Sanji pulls out the little thing and sets it on the table. Sanji gives a bewildered look to Carrie as the snail keeps ringing. You had to have been raised under a rock, bug. Oh, shut up, what is it? It's a phone. The hell's a phone? Sanji stares at Carrie for an indeterminate amount of time, and when he suspects the snail is about to be up on its ringing, he decides whatever is on the other side of the line would provide much-needed reprieve from the second mate's idiocy. So he picks up the receiver, stares Carrie dead in the eyes and greets into the little microphone, "This is the shitty restaurant. Do you want a reservation?" Okay, that hadn't really been what he'd been meaning to say, but that habit was hard ingrained into him from his days working in the Baratai. Carrie stares at him like he's the biggest idiot on the planet. Irony be damned. But before Carrie can rip Sanji to threads, a husky voice crackles through the speaker of the snail, which was in reality its mouth. Which was really disconcerting to Carrie, who thinks the snail is suddenly possessed. Stop fooling around, you idiot. You're late with your report. Report? What shitty report? Sanji blinks over at Carrie, rapidly gesturing to the snail in a what the hell do I say next gesture. Carrie just throws her hands up because the snail was possessed and he was asking her what he should say next. She wasn't a cleric. She didn't know shit about exorcisms. Of course. Right, report. Sanji stumbles to say something after the silence had reigned too long. He winces at his own stumble and opens and closes his mouth a few times before smartly asking, "Could you remind me who I'm speaking with?" The snail looked beyond miffed at the slacking behavior. "It's me," the snail says. "Mr. Zero." Mr. Zero is a snail, Emittich. Carrie can't finish the thought as Sanji is strangling her with a pillow. The snail perks up in alarm. "Mr. 3? Mr. 3, who else is there with you?" Carrie and Sanji meet each other's eyes over the pillow. Carrie has a very brief look of panic because she was fresh out of ideas and Sanji was currently running by the first wacky nonsense to come to mind. Weren't the women named after weekdays or something? Miss Hump Day. Carrie glared with a promise of pain to follow such a horrendous cover name. The snail's expression turns to palpable confusion and bewilderment. Miss Hump Day. Yup. Sanji, who is posing as Mr. 3 right now, says smartly. He's sweating up a storm from where he fumbles back to the snail and scoops up the transponder again. She stopped in for a visit for our, nefarious plans? Carrie decides to screw it all and hops on the telepathic link. Sanji, what the hells are you doing? Sanji makes rapid eye contact back and forth with the snail and the warlock. Mr. Zero's the head honcho of Baroque Works. The head. If we want any info, we need to play along. Well then let's just squish him and move on. Country saved or whatever. Carrie gestures weakly to the den mushy currently eyeing the pair up. Sanji's eye twitches. Mr. Zero is on the other side of the snail bug. Carrie looks up and around in confusion. The snail quietly questions, "Nefarious plans?" Carrie wants to shake Sanji around until he explains to her all the weird shit they have in this world, but for now she needs to shoot the shit. Well, at least she was charismatic. Yes sir, yes sir. Carrie crows in a horrendously fake accent that has Sanji staring at her in horror. Came down yonder so I could join dear Mr. Tiri here in walloping the, locals. Sanji stares at Carrie. The den mushy, and thus Mr. Zero, stares at Carrie. Carrie mentally stares at herself and wants to bang her head against the wall. Yet, against all odds, Carrie must have been riding the high of deception just enough to crest past his minimum requirement. She really hopes that was a positive, Ah yes, I totally believe you. Ah, and not an ah, I now know your location and which place to blow up. Ah. Sanji stares at the ceiling long enough that Carrie thinks he might be praying to the maiden for patience, before he clicks back to respond to Mr. Zero. She's very eager, sir. I can see that. The little snail says dryly, perhaps still coming to terms with whatever nonsense was taking place. Carrie threw up her hands in triumph because she could not believe her panicked pandering worked. Sanji looks equally as baffled at her but fumbles back for the den when it quietly asks, "Now, have Princess Vivi and the Straw Hat Pirates been eliminated yet?" Well, that certainly sucked the joy out of the room. A cursory glance from Sanji had Carrie picking the link back up. Thoughts. And prayers. Carrie thinks back, to which Sanji looks bewilderingly at her. Carrie throws her arms up in a "what do you want me to do" gesture. You're the second mate. With an intelligence of 9, dipshit. What the hell does that even mean? Why so hesitant, Mr. 3? Hump day. Oh, she was going to wring Sanji's neck when they were back on the Mary. The snail continues unperturbed. I asked you a question. I expect an answer. Carrie starts again because panic made her do really dumb things when they were on a time crunch. We took care of him, that we did, sir. That we did. Put him right out. Got the dragon turtles, Sea King's Monchin on him down under the surface. Yeah. Carrie trails for a moment and Sanji is staring at her with mounting dread. They're sleepin' with the fishies all good and snug. Never mind, Sanji's dread turns to horror. Once again, the snail is so silent that Carrie likes to think she's given the BBG on the other end an aneurysm. Maybe then they can all avoid this prolonged horrible venture. Oh, never mind, he's speaking again. Well, good work then. The little snail compliments, and it looks pained to do so, like complimenting anyone, no less someone as bafflingly strange as Miss Hump Day was a chore in itself. There's a little bit of fiddling in the background of the call, likely Mr. Zero moving about. The unluckies are on their way now. To confirm that the job is done, and coming with a delivery. Carrie faces Sanji and mouths unluckies. To which he shrugs, and it makes her feel a little better knowing that they were both out of water with this one. Right? Sanji starts slowly, sliding his eyes to the little snail with furrowed brows, and might we get a hint as to the contents of the delivery? An eternal log post to Alabasta. Carrie immediately starts slapping Sanji's shoulder in her excitement. Sanji slaps back just as overexcited but keeps his expression as neutral as possible, likely knowing that Mr. Zero would see the excitement on his face on the other side of the snail if he let it slip what a big win this was for them. I want you to head for Alabasta with Ms. Golden Week and... The snail's face twists for a moment before sighing and muttering, and Miss Hump Day. The time has come to begin the most crucial part of our plan. Go to Alabasta and await further in. While that was all well and good, both Sanji and Carrie are distracted by the wax in the wall melting and a bird and otter sticking their heads through the wall. They stare at each other for an indeterminate amount of time. Carrie and Sanji share a look. The bird and otter share a look. They exchange looks just in general. And suddenly Carrie is rocketing forward and summoning her glaive in hand to slam both bird and otter back out the wall and to make sure they don't interrupt the information dumping they were currently receiving. Sanji hurriedly shoos her off to do that while he immediately lifts the den mushy away from the kerfuffle taking place outside with the occasional yell of "Eat arcane animal kingdom," or "Oversized turkey have an ass." Mr. 3? The snail suddenly asks, making Sanji panic and look down at the confused face. Mr. 3, what was that? What? Sanji says at the exact time that there is a vague explosion outside the wax house followed by a squawk of pain. Was that an explosion, Mr. 3? Sir, I think you need to have your ears checked. Sanji winces, doing him damnedest to try and muffle the microphone, but there is only so much you can do when your second mate decides to shout, "Toll the dead," and it suddenly sounds like you're in a cathedral. Excuse me? Oh ha ha ha. Sanji laughs nervously when he barely avoids part of the wall giving way when a stray eldritch blast bursts through the wax. You know, I think that's just Miss Hump Day out there. She saw a rodent she had to take care of. A rodent? Mr. 3. Are you saying that the straw hats were not properly disposed of? No. No. Sanji quickly backtracks, stepping over the chunk of wall that caved in to peek outside at the fighting warlock currently beating the bird and otter to hell and back. You know our Miss Hump Day. Always full of surprises. He covers the receiver and thinks hard at Carrie. Wrap it up now, bedbug. Bedbug? Carrie punches the bird and is now wrestling to keep its beak shut while also pinning the otter down with her legs. It's a very comical sight if it weren't at the absolute worst time. Mr. 3, I expect you and Miss Hump Day to be on the way to Alabasta as soon as. Yeah, you got it, boss. Talk to you later. And Sanji hangs up on the guy. Carrie blinks over at Sanji, who just realized the major error of his ways. The snail blinks up at him, now rid of any judgmental expression. Sanji just wallows. And it finally clicks for Carrie. Oh, so it's like a sending stone? Get your ass back here, shitbird. Carrie fixes her grapple on the bird when it starts blaring its squawking for all the world to hear. Not that it does it much good now, considering that Mr. Zero was no longer within listening range. Sanji sits on the ground with his head in his hands. Carrie watches him for all of 5 seconds before she perks up and reveals the object they were apparently delivering to them, held tight by her tail. Because go figure, these pair of ne'er-do-wells were the unluckies. And they sure as hell were unlucky, considering their luck in having to fend off against a frantic and panicking tiefling warlock. Sanji glances up at the eternal log pose clutched tight in Carrie's tail and considers this to be at least a baby win. He then glances at the pair of creatures still being kept grappled by Carrie. I think they won't pose a threat anymore. Carrie blinks, glances down at the bird and otter, winces and lets go. Both collapse to the ground, thoroughly spent. Oops. Shit, oops. What the hell was that shitshow with the accent? Sanji asks as he slides up to stand. Carrie stumbles her way up, frantically patting at her clothes. She points at Sanji like he's just as equally at fault with this whole shitshow. Hey, you were the one who decided to call me Miss Hump Day. Well, sorry. But I was thinking about Vivi's name when I came up with it on the fly. Carrie recoils in alarm. And your first thought was Hump Day? Oh my, Wednesday is the hump day of the week. The pair's bickering accompanies them for as long as it takes to reach and find their other compatriots. Nami, the first to hear the approaching bickering, glances over her shoulder. Is Sanji bickering with Carrie? Never thought I'd see the day. Usopp mutters as he watches both burst through the treeline and into view. Does this count as character growth? Zoro asks. Meanwhile, Luffy, shirtless, loudly exclaims his excitement at seeing the pair. Hey Sanji. Hey Carrie. Luffy. Carrie shouts back, charging in and not really paying attention at all to the pair of giants overlooking their little gathering, looking equally as roughed up as the small band of crewmates. She points threateningly at Sanji and shouts, Tell Sanji that Wednesday is not called Hump Day. Sanji squawks in horror, from where he'd been attempting to perform his gentlemanly duties of making sure Nami is properly covered up with his offered coat. Luffy's head tilts to the side. But, it is. No, Carrie whispers in horror. Ha. Sanji cackles, pointing at Carrie like he won the lottery. Told you. Is this part of Bully Carrie Day? Vivi asks from her own vantage point. All the crew shrugs, probably. Oi. Zoro calls the pair's attention to himself. Where were you two? He looks at Carrie specifically. We could have used a bit of second-mate help here. And a bit of cook's help? No, not really. While Sanji and Zoro start butting heads. Were Zoro's feet okay? Oh, what the hell's, they'll address that later. Hold one, where's his shirt? Carrie opts to do her best in regaling the group with the events both cook and second mate had just undergone, which was really confusing and not at all straightforward. So Mr. Zero is a snail. He is not a snail. Sanji yells, pulling away from his half-hearted clash with Zoro to glare at Carrie, before immediately recognizing he was glaring at a woman, and quickly checking himself. He takes a deep breath and better explains, We found some Baroque Works agents' hideout. We intercepted a transponder snail and the caller just so happened to be Mr. Zero. The crew stare at them for a while, Broggy and, well, she wasn't really sure who the second giant was, stare down at them in equal confusion and interest. Not too dissimilar to when one does not want to participate in the drama, but sure as hell will bring the popcorn when it does happen. Vivi is the first to break the shocked silence by yelling, You spoke with Mr. Zero? Yup, Sanji confirms. He thought I was Mr. 3. We told him we were dead. Carrie adds unhelpfully. But apparently this information is very helpful. You told him we were dead? Vivi asks. That's what we told him. Sanji confirms. Usopp throws himself at Carrie and clings onto the warlock, similar to how he'd been doing so not even a couple hours ago. You are no longer the bane of my existence. Carrie rolls her eyes but pats the poor muddled man on the back. But this doesn't solve our problem of how to get off the island. Nami mutters. Usopp peels himself off of Carrie, back to being the bane. Oh no, I'm not. Carrie makes a frantic gesture at Sanji while also slinging an arm around Usopp to prevent him from getting away. Show the thing. Show the thing. Sanji rolls his eyes but does promptly show the eternal log pose. Usopp has tears of joy bud in his eyes as he quickly clings back onto Carrie while the others shout their varying bewilderment. I dub this bully Carrie day over. Thank you. Carrie preens. The rejoicing is short-lived though, as Luffy is immediately announcing that it's time to book it. To which all parties promptly agree and start back for the merry. Vivi was praising Sanji for his work. Carrie was a little offended. All she got was a thumbs up from the girl, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. Luffy was running ahead, cackling like the ball of sun he was. Usopp was chasing after him. Nami was scolding the pair to slow their asses down because she still had some wax clinging to her. No clue, don't ask Carrie. And Zoro had opted to follow at the back of the pack and use Carrie as a crutch because the cuts on his feet weren't just for show. Thus a little first mate and second mate debrief session took place. So, Carrie starts slowly, why do your feet look like they were caught in a cloud of daggers? Why do you smell like vomit? Okay, point taken. Carrie rolls her eyes and keeps marching forward while Zoro eventually does give her a breakdown of all of the events they'd been facing while Carrie and Sanji were off rolling stealth and deception checks. Carrie likewise fills Zoro in on what she could accurately interpret. And by her casual mention of not understanding in the slightest what the hell's a den mushy was, he took it upon himself to explain. I knew it was like a sending stone. Sending stone? Fancy rock you can speak into and other people hear it. You think snails are weird, but talking into a rock isn't? Listen, Carrie cuts herself off when they trail into a clearing, spotting the Mary and their crew starting to board. Sanji was off somewhere, likely going to drag Zoro's alleged quarry so they can compare size. There was definitely an innuendo in there, but that isn't important right now. What is important is the fact that Carrie is suddenly hyper-aware that Zoro is running unusually warm. Sparing an odd look to the swordsman, Carrie voices this fact. You always this hot? Zoro, who'd been taking a step to try and disentangle himself from Carrie, immediately fumbles and has to grab the warlock to keep balance. Excuse me? Carrie looks confused. Why? You. Zoro stops, takes a deep breath and starts again. Come again? Carrie rolls her eyes and clarifies. Do you always run this hot? Zoro's expression goes through a dance of bewilderment, confusion, realization, horror, and chagrin. He breathes about to speak but is promptly cut off by Luffy yelling, Come on. Come on. It's time to go. Carrie and Zoro spare a telling look, and the conversation is dropped as they trudge up to join their crewmates on deck. A short while later they are back on the sea and headed to Alabasta. Carrie was electing to ignore the very weird shit with the giants and the island eater. Everyone was too busy screaming to properly contemplate just what had happened anyways. And so now the crew is back to their usual groove of passing the time till the next bizarre adventure occurs. And unfortunately passing the time in this case meant chilling in the galley. Why not the deck? You might ask. Well, Carrie was currently trying to brew a batch of ginger tea to help settle her stomach because the meat from earlier was not settling well. And as it were, Sanji was preoccupied with promising Nami to help reorganize the girls' room after Nami revealed her earlier novel searching had resulted in the equivalent of a book explosion. So Carrie was unfortunately left to fend for her own. Luckily she'd seen Sanji work the kettle enough times to figure out at least the basics on how to brew tea, but she was still sure he might have a conniption at someone waltzing into his kitchen uninvited. Carrie was really banking on him being a simp here and not giving a shit if she bats her eyes enough times. And thus Carrie was brewing tea. Rather unsuccessfully, but nothing had exploded so she considers it a win. Only for her to immediately flail when the galley door swung open. Sanji, I promise it's not what it looks like. Vivi? Her floundering got put on pause as she stared at their guest princess. Vivi, who walked into the galley in hopes of acquiring her own cup of tea to help her settle after the whirlwind of a day they'd just had, blinks at the sight of Carrie and an overflowing kettle. She points at the kettle. I think it's finished boiling. Carrie swears and hurriedly tries to rescue what she could of the water as it bubbles and spills onto the counter. Sanji was going to maim her at this rate. Carrie turns her head as she's pouring her cup. Vivi points at the kettle, a sheepish smile on her face. Could I have a cup too? It takes Carrie an embarrassing moment to realize what Vivi was asking for. Oh. Carrie places down the kettle, scrambling for another teacup. Yeah. Sure, let me just. She scrounges for a moment before managing to find a finer china more fit to the princess status. She concocts a second cup in no time, throwing in the required herbs to steep. Vivi smiles awkwardly at her cup when Carrie places it at the kitchen table for them both. Aren't, you supposed to put the herbs into an infuser? Carrie slides into her seat at the table with her scalding drink. It's called loose leaf. I was raised with this sort of tea first. Tea bags are, Carrie's face pinches thoughtfully. Weird? I've only had infusers. Vivi hums, peeking into the cup thoughtfully. Carrie hums, fingers running around the rim of her cup for a moment. She briefly has to shake out her hand when the heat gets to be a little too much. Then her eyes flicker up to Vivi, who is still looking thoughtfully down at her own cup. I didn't really get to introduce myself properly before, Carrie says. When Vivi's eyes snap up, Carrie extends a hand in offering. I'm Carrie, second mate and member of the Straw Hat Pirates. Vivi's lips twitch up in amusement and she doesn't waste any time in reaching forward to shake the offered hand. I'm Vivi, princess and next in line for the throne of Alabasta. Damn, Carrie mutters when their hands drop. She goes back to cradling her tea and pretending it doesn't burn her palms. Quite the title. Vivi laughs softly, a bit somberly, but it's earnest. Second mate to the Straw Hats isn't a bad title either. Yeah, but I'm hoping to get something more badass down the line. Carrie raises her hands as if to present the title of her future, Mage Slayer, Carrie Warlock of the Straw Hats. It gets a laugh out of the girl and Carrie can't help but smile proudly at the sound. By the time Vivi comes down from her brief giggle fit, she's looking kindly at Carrie. So that's what you are? A warlock. Carrie nods, a content smile on her face. Yep. You're looking at the only warlock this side of the Grand Line. Her smile twitches. Hopefully. Vivi continues to smile lightly. Nami mentioned you hadn't eaten a devil fruit. So I was curious. She trails for a moment. How I do magic shit? Carrie surmises. Vivi nods her head side to side at the description but doesn't contend it. Carrie chuckles, starting to run her fingers around the rim of her teacup again. Yeah, it's normal. Most people are a little more than confused with my magic act. But what you're seeing is 100% genuine arcane prowess. Wow. Vivi breathes. Carrie grins. Vivi looks like she wants to ask something but appears to pause, her expression a little nervous. Not that Carrie cares as she gestures for her to speak her mind. It still takes a moment to get the confidence to ask, so, is being a warlock why you look, Yeah, that would be a good reason why Vivi was more than nervous to speak her mind. Waving off Vivi's concern, Carrie assures her, you're good. She crosses her arms, laying them against the table as she explains. I'm a tiefling, it's a separate thing. Oh, Vivi says, more pleasant than embarrassed, which was great because she really hadn't meant anything cruel by it, she was just curious. Her eyes even twinkle in further interest like she wants to ask more, but elects to instead take a sip of her tea. Only to immediately wince, cough and rasp, I think you burnt it. Carrie blinks. What? You burnt the tea. Vivi politely pushes the cup away from her. Carrie blinks wildly, mouth opening and closing. How can I burn tea? I don't know. Vivi laughs humorlessly, staring down at the drink like it personally offended her. But you sure managed to burn it. There's no way, Carrie remarks, taking a sip of the concoction only to immediately gag and spit the tea back into the cup. Sweet divine. Told you. Vivi says. Sanji's going to be so disappointed in me. Carrie whispers, staring at the tea like it was a poison strong enough to ignore her natural resistance. Her whisper startles a laugh out of Vivi. And Carrie looks up in offense, dramatically laying a hand on her chest as she gasps. How dare you take enjoyment in my suffering? Sorry, Vivi giggles in no way sounding apologetic. Carrie continues to act offended, dramatically turning away, lifting her nose to the air and huffing. But Vivi just continues to smile at the dramatic act. My dad couldn't brew tea for the life of him either. Well, that certainly came out of nowhere. Carrie drops her faux pouting to give Vivi a searching look. Your dad the king? Yeah, Vivi smiles, her expression somber but reminiscent. He swore it had something to do with the water. He always said he followed the instructions to a T, but it never came out right no matter how hard he tried. Carrie quietly watches Vivi as she stares sadly into the reflection of the tea. What was your dad like? Carrie asked. Kind. Vivi immediately answers. He was always trying to put the people first. He wanted to see his people happy. He wanted to see me happy. Vivi continues to smile sadly, her eyes distant on a memory of better times before Crocodile. He wants to be a kind ruler, someone who is strong for putting those before himself first. Carrie's fingers run along the kitchen table in quiet contemplation. I think I'd like to meet him. Carrie decides. Vivi's eyes lift to her, curious and retreating from their previous somber. I haven't met any kings before, Carrie explains, and the ones where I'm from have a weird trope of either being corrupt or just plain negligent. She runs a hand through her hair, momentarily taking off her hat to do such. I swear it was like every other week I heard about some monarch getting thrown off their high horse by some adventuring party swearing vengeance for one of their members. Vivi gives her a disbelieving look. Really? Carrie nods with a dry chuckle. Really? Blinking, Vivi can't help but stare into her teacup with a thoughtful look. Huh. Yeah, Carrie chuckles. It's weird. Vivi's quiet, fingers drumming against the table before she whispers, I want my kingdom to be okay again. And oh how wishful she sounded. Carrie smiles sadly at Vivi, reaching forward to hesitantly lay her hand on Vivi's, her eyes hardened. You'll get through this. And your home will too. Carrie's eyes practically sparkle as she puts on a more confident smile and says, after every storm comes a rainbow, right? Vivi gives a sad chuckle. Yeah? Before further conversation could take place, they are interrupted by the galley door slamming open. Carrie, given that she was still on the lookout for their chef likely maiming her due to her invasion of his kitchen, immediately flails and knocks both of their teas to the floor. Damn it. Wait, no, Sanji, I swear. But it was not Sanji in the threshold. It was Usopp, who looked beyond worried as his hand held onto the doorway for dear life. His Adam's apple bobbing as he swallows and stammers. Zoro just collapsed. Zoro is sick. And he's not just sick as in a little cold that makes you sneeze a lot. Or maybe the sort of sick where you need to hover by the toilet for a couple hours. No, he's sick. The kind of sick that borders on brain boiling. Carrie is not a fan of this. Dude, Carrie mutters towards the bundled up first mate, if this is you pulling a fast one, it is not funny. Zoro of course does not respond. Because he is knocked out cold and, as established, sick. After the news of Zoro dropping like a fly, Carrie had scrambled onto deck to put her second mate ass in gear. The sight of Zoro collapsed, apparently having barely roused due to Luffy's concerned prodding, and insisting that he was fine only to drop again spurned Carrie into action. And now they were here, temporarily holed up in the girls' room and using Nami's bed as a temporary resting place for the near-comatose swordsman. Of course, to only add salt to the wound, Zoro doesn't answer her. Maybe he ate something bad? Luffy guesses, and bless his heart it was in the right place, but it is definitely not what's happening right now. Zoro's got the constitution of a bull, Usopp says. I doubt he ate something that bad. The weather in the Grand Line can sometimes cause problems like this for new crews. Vivi suddenly pipes up, having been quiet up until this point. She looks surprisingly thoughtful for the harrowing situation. The climate can cause major sickness for those unprepared. Sure, but that's like seasonal allergies, right? Carrie guesses, sparing another look to the sickly swordsman. I doubt anything like that would put Zoro on his ass this bad. Right as she finished the thought, Nami came climbing down with a wet rag in hand and a steely expression. Got a rag and a thermometer. Said thermometer is promptly shoved into the swordsman's mouth the minute she's close enough. And the rag gets draped across his forehead, sounding a brief pained groan. While they wait for the thermometer to do its job, Carrie was not going to bother asking what the hells it was doing. A thought comes to mind. Usopp looks at Carrie and asks, do you have any magic that could help? Carrie's frown only deepens as she shakes her head. No, my spells don't really work in healing. I could at least tell you whether this is a magic-based illness or not, but I can't do much about it. Since when could you do that? Sanji asks, twisting his cigarette between his fingers, focusing on Carrie in a clear attempt to try and distract himself from Zoro's sorry state. I realized it after Laboon. Carrie shrugged. That and Toll the Dead were new to me. Sanji makes a humming noise of acknowledgement, but it's clear that he's still distracted by the situation at hand. Then Nami takes out the thermometer and gasps in alarm. It's 104. Well, now it just got a lot more tense. He needs a doctor. Luffy says, leaving no room for argument. There's sure to be a doctor in Alabasta, right? Usopp says, turning to Vivi, how much farther till we get there? I can't be certain, Vivi mutters, but it has to be at least a week. If Mosshead continues to run that hot, he won't last a week. Sanji points out, staring unseeingly at Zoro and continuing to twist his cigarette. The reality is starting to really sink in. Carrie begins to twist her shackles to stave off the anxiety. And worse yet, Nami seems to sink into herself and mutter, it's no use. But before anyone can further remark, Nami goes to her desk and immediately starts rummaging through the contents. Everyone watches in confusion until she finds the object of focus and turns around and presents a newspaper. It's not much at first glance, but apparently whatever the title reads must be remarkably important to Vivi, as the girl goes pale and instantly snatches it out of Nami's hands to sift through. By the dawning look over the others' faces, it must be more important than expected. Yet Carrie can only just stand and wait. But then Vivi is anxiously spouting the contents, explaining that the rebel army in Alabasta is growing in numbers by the day, saying that the royal army is diminishing in time with it as more and more of their soldiers defect. The longer this goes, the more people will die. And suddenly Carrie understands why everyone looks so anxious. That's from 3 days ago. Nami admits after Vivi is done speaking the details. And by now, Nami trails the reality left unsaid in the hopes that maybe they were wrong, that it wouldn't be worse. But with that, Nami looks to Luffy and asks, "You get it now?" Luffy's lips thin and he seems a mix of concerned and contemplative. "I get that it's bad. Bad is maybe putting it too lightly." Nami humorlessly laughs. Vivi is still staring out into space with a vacant expression. And then she's speaking, "We need to get to Alabasta." Carrie's mind grinds to a record-scratching halt. "Wait," Carrie says, breaking her brief silence. "We just established that Zoro won't last a week and Alabasta is far outside the stretch of said week." "Yes," Vivi starts, and she has a patient look on her face for someone suggesting what she is implying, "but that was before we knew about the state of Alabasta." "Carrie, Zoro's tougher than he looks," Nami reasons. "And yes, sure, the big idiot was a lot sturdier than he ought to be, but that didn't stop the matter at hand. He was currently near comatose due to something as measly as a fever." "I understand," Carrie says, trying and failing to keep a level tone. Which, to clarify, she was keeping it neutral, but her lashing tail was putting quite a damper on her presentation. "But Alabasta's been this way for a time, right?" Vivi's expression spasms, that calm display turning hurt. And, yeah, okay. It made sense after the little chat she and Carrie had just had. About how she desperately wanted the conflict to end. "Yes, but that doesn't mean we can ignore." "But we aren't ignoring it," Carrie quickly says, snipping that line of thought in the bud real quick. "We're addressing it, we really are, but that doesn't mean we can throw away other problems when they arise just to focus on the biggest bad. I'm confused why this is suddenly a problem when earlier today you were fine with taking your time on Little Garden." And suddenly Vivi just looks pissed. "That was before I knew my country is in as bad a state as it is." Something about her words gives Carrie pause. The look in Vivi's eyes is familiar in an off-putting way. A need for fixing something. A need for love. No, not love. Something darker. "Careful," Carrie says very, very slowly, "before your care turns to something fouler." Before anyone could really think about Carrie's words, Usopp is stepping forward and raising his hands between them. Carrie hadn't realized how close they both got during the little argument, and suddenly Carrie feels very stupid. But she wouldn't back down on her point. So, Carrie took a step back, took a deep breath to calm down, and let her tension bleed away. With Zoro down for the count, she needs to play at being the level head the crew can rely on. She couldn't go losing her temper. Vivi obviously did not share the same belief, hands clenching and unclenching in a poor attempt to stave off her frustration. Her eyes narrowed at Carrie, angered. But before she can get another word out and reignite the fire, Usopp interrupts the pair. "How about we take a second to chill?" He's surprisingly level-headed for the whole situation at hand. Carrie does just that, continuing to take deep breaths in and out, eyes trailing to Zoro and just watching the rise and FLL of his chest. She takes a deep breath in before again exhaling and looking at Vivi, who seems to be doing a much poorer job of trying to put a lid on her frustration. "At the end of the day, it's not our call." Carrie's eyes dart to a quiet Luffy, who'd been watching them go back and forth the whole time. "It's Luffy's." Vivi's lips thin, but her eyes soften when she looks at Luffy, perhaps realizing the truth in Carrie's words. She wasn't a full-fledged member of the crew. She was a guest on board, and Luffy was willing to work with her goal, but also, his crew was another matter entirely. Yet during the small spat, Luffy had been staring at Carrie, his eyes watching her with an uncanny awareness. Then, when realizing that the attention was on him, his expression of focus turned to one of normal joyousness. "You're both right," he says all too happily. "We'll sail as fast as we can to Alabasta, but we stop at the first island we find that has a doctor." It pulls something loose in Carrie, shoulders sagging forward with a relieved sigh. "Okay," Carrie nods. Likewise, the decision makes Vivi's hackles fall. Her hands finally going lax at her side, and her expression overall a little less pinched. She doesn't verbally acknowledge it, but she does nod. Now satisfied with the course they were headed, Nami gently grabs Vivi by the elbow and begins guiding her out. "Come on," she says, "you're more familiar with the course to Alabasta than I am. And you'll know if there are any good islands on the way that we can stop at for Zoro." Vivi gives a small hum of understanding and both are gone from the room. Soon after, Usopp follows them with a mutter of protecting the Mary from any nefarious enemy pirates who might heed them in their mission. Sanji goes right after that, talking about having to scrounge up a reasonable soup for Moss. Then finally it was just Carrie, Luffy, and their sickly swordsman. Carrie immediately puts it upon herself to stay and watch over Zoro, but is immediately interrupted from voicing this by Luffy slinging himself at her and clinging to her back like a koala. "You're a good second mate." It said incredibly simply, like Luffy was regarding Carrie with the weather. Just that she was a good second mate. Yet Carrie gives a self-depreciating laugh and drags over a stool to sit vigil at Zoro's bedside. Luffy is still clinging to her all the while. "I don't know about that," she mutters while staring down at a ragged Zoro. "I almost threw hands with a princess just now. A princess she had just gotten along with not even half an hour ago too." "Your heart was in the right place," Luffy reasons, "and so was Vivi's." "Yeah," Carrie mutters, taking off her hat and tossing it over to her hammock. She misses by a landslide and it's now on the floor. "I see that now." Though she frowns when she says it, mind still lingering on the look Vivi had given her. Luffy notices but doesn't remark. "You're a good second mate," is instead what Luffy says again. Something about him repeating it makes Carrie laugh a little more earnestly this time. Her frown let up into a tiny smile. She's still anxious as hell, that was obvious, but something about the sheer presence that Luffy brought always managed to put those anxieties away. "Thanks, Luff," Carrie says. Luffy smiles, his eyes trailing to Zoro. It's quiet for a while. "Zoro's going to be okay." "He better be." Turns out Luffy had a max of an hour of patience before he was bouncing off to go pester another one of his crew, leaving Carrie to the quiet task of sitting vigil. This was all good and dandy, but Carrie had to admit that watching her friend's ragged breathing and half scared it'd stop every time it took a beat too long to start again was doing nothing for her anxiety. To pass the time without letting the anxiety fully take her over, Carrie opted to sit on the floor, back against the bed, and meditate. This lasted a total of 15 minutes before she realized Zoro's wet coughing didn't make for a good ambience. So now she was sitting back on her stool, hands twisting through different motions of prestidigitation in an effort to distract herself from Zoro's none too pleasant visage. Carrie will later find it very ironic that the magic she's warping is in the presentation of a little swordsman when Zoro rouses. Not that she knew at first. Still too focused on her little magic trick, making the miniature move as realistically as possible. Zoro had only barely woken up, brought to consciousness by the low buzz of energy that signaled Carrie's little practice. He barely opens his eyes, squinting at the ceiling in question before seeing the light flickering to his side. A simple head tilt and Zoro was beholden to Carrie's anxious cantrip. He watches as she twists and turns the little arcane swordsman, frowning when a position doesn't seem realistic enough. And by the time 2 minutes passed, it was clear she was stuck on one posture. "You aren't raising the arms enough." Zoro's comment is very quickly registered by Carrie. The little swordsman vanishes with Carrie's focus elsewhere. The first mate watches as hope, fear, relief, and anxiety, doubled now, take her over. "Hey dingus," Carrie says by way of greeting. Zoro snorts and lazily looks around the cabin, a hazy fever still in his eyes. "Where am I?" "Nami and I's room." The answer doesn't do much to help Zoro's confusion as his brows furrow and he asks, "How did I get here?" "You're sick." Carrie answers simply, keeping her tone deceptively neutral. Again, her tail was doing a poor job of trying to hide her true feelings, twisting anxiously. "You passed out on deck and we brought you down here when we realized you were running very hot." Carrie pauses, appearing as if she wants to say something else before she thinks screw it and finishes with, "Also you just look like shit." Zoro makes a noise like he both does and doesn't believe her. "Well, I sure feel like shit." Carrie frowns, crossing her arms over her chest and looking away with a glare. "Next time say something, asshole." "Well, I would have whatever Zoro's point would be was promptly lost as he breaks into a hacking fit. The sound grates on Carrie's ears and feels both too dry and too wet. Breaking her full frustration, Carrie immediately goes for the water on the bedside table, handing it over to Zoro as he tries to stifle his coughing fit into the crook of his elbow. Carrie can only anxiously wait for Zoro to choke down his water. Any semblance of poking and prodding now long gone. Gasping after he finished chugging down the water, Carrie would misty step her way up to the kitchen to request a refill from Sanji and scare the chef out of his wits later. Zoro lets the cup drop to the side table it had previously been on and just sits there and breathes. Carrie watches him for a while, anxiously biting her lip as she watches him. Then, when the silence borders on discomforting, Carrie asks, "You gonna be okay?" Zoro has the audacity to snort, Come on, like this is gonna take me down? Zoro, you were running a temperature of 104 earlier. Carrie says, only to pause and frown, which, okay, I don't actually know what that means. But I know big numbers are bad when you're sick and you're running hot enough for Sanji to use you as a pan to cook an egg. I'm at 104? Zoro blanches. Carrie's expression twists. Well, I don't know about now, but you were earlier. Well, shit. You know shit, well shit. Carrie hisses, tail lashing and smacking into the side table, causing the contents to fall off. Zoro watches the tail lashing and gives her a dry look, which was honestly impressive considering how pale and clammy he was. Alright, how about you calm down for a sec? Zoro, I have zero qualms with beating up a sick man. Point taken. They sit in silence for a total of 8 seconds before Zoro decides to get to the root of the problem. What's going on between those horns of yours? Something about the question makes Carrie slouch into herself, her tail falling and just lying pathetically on the floor. She stares off into space for a grand total of 8 more seconds before she answers. Zoro, you're the first friend I've literally ever had. You'd think I'd be a little anxious when that friend gets sick. Zoro rolls his eyes, scooting around to have his back to the wall, but still comfortably sat in the bed. He pats the spot next to him in invitation. Carrie raises a brow. Aren't you not supposed to get close to sick people? You're the one with poison resistance or whatever. So sit your ass down. Rolling her eyes but crawling onto the bed as asked, Carrie sits down beside Zoro, back leaning against the wall for only a moment before Zoro is manhandling her into his side and wrapping an arm around her. Carrie fights it for all of 2 seconds before succumbing and just lying against the human furnace. The reminder of just how warm Zoro was running did little to negate her stress, just hitting her with the realization that for a moment she forgot how sick Zoro was. How he had acted aloof for that brief moment if only to pull Carrie out of her head. It makes Carrie both thankful and filled with the urge to slug Zoro when he's in better shape. Pretty sure poison resistance doesn't work that way. Carrie mutters, still not fighting it as Zoro leans a bit more of his weight on Carrie than necessary. Likely not even realizing it. Yeah, well, who cares? Zoro mutters, and this close as Carrie hearing the wheezing tremor with every breath he takes. How he's far more out of it than he's currently leading her to believe. The realization makes Carrie go quiet. But Zoro doesn't let her silence linger too long. I'll be fine, Tails. You don't know that. I do. Zoro's tone brokers no room for argument. Because I'm pretty sure that our captain would rather sacrifice himself than have any member of his crew suffer. Not to mention the stick-in-her-ass second mate. Again, I will fight you, fever or not. All bark and no bite. Carrie looks incredibly upset. Your ass is grass when you're back on your feet. But like I was saying, Zoro says, evading the likely future of Carrie beating him senseless for scaring the daylights out of her, I'll be fine because if Luffy can't figure it out, then I know you'll step in to figure it out. That's why you're second mate. He lightly knocks Carrie on the head. I know I can rely on you to make any decisions while I'm out. Carrie continues frowning, not even bothered by the light knock to the head. You promise you'll be alright? Why promise when it's a guarantee? Carrie's lips thin. Humor me. Zoro dramatically rolls his eyes. I promise. There. Happy? Carrie loses some of her tension. Her head knocks into his shoulder, resting there for a moment before humming in content. Good, Zoro says, his tone starting to slur at the edges. Carrie spares a look over and it's obvious that Zoro is fighting sleep. I'm gonna pass out now, you gonna be okay? Carrie snorts and Zoro is already asleep by the time she mutters, yeah, I'll be okay. So it turns out being used as a support pillar to sleep on is not an acceptable thing to do when the person leaning on you is sicker than a good guitar riff. Nami gave Carrie an earful before telling Carrie that clearly she'd been sitting alone in the room with Zoro too long and needed a much-needed break. Carrie argued she was fine and could keep going, but apparently 6 hours with no break is a relievable amount of time. So then she was out on deck, sunning with the last dregs of sunlight available. She tried meditating but again was too anxious to really focus on anything besides Zoro. So instead she decided to practice her glaive forms. Which also did little to negate her anxiety as she kept thinking back to Zoro's scoldings and corrections in said forms. Though she did admit the training helped a bit and got her through about an hour until she gave up and opted to just sit and wallow in the crow's nest. To her surprise, someone decided to join her. Carrie didn't really hear anyone climb up, so she's all the more surprised when a head of coiled hair bursts into view. Carrie blinks down at the sniper, still a bit pissy with him for the whole meat debacle back on Little Garden, before she scoots over to make room when Usopp properly climbs in. There isn't a lot of room to begin with, so it's a little awkward and cramped, But they make it work by having Usopp on one side and Carrie on the other, both pressed thigh to thigh in the tiny space. Any reason for coming up here, or am I just special? Zoro told me to come up here and tell you that I'm your friend. Carrie's mouth snaps shut and any possible follow-up is immediately gone. Not to mention her remaining frustrations vanished near instantly. Seeing Carrie's reaction, Usopp tilts his head a bit more forward. "Wanna tell me why he asked me to tell you that?" Carrie narrowed her eyes at Usopp, but anyone could easily tell that the glare was not directed at the liar but instead the sickly swordsman down below deck. "No. Is that a no I won't tell you, or a no I won't tell you because I'm embarrassed?" Carrie does not deign that with an answer. Instead she glares at the side of the crow's nest and continues brooding. But apparently her brooding was not an acceptable atmosphere as Usopp begins to wax poetic about a tale that Carrie's never heard. All the beats are overly extravagant, and all the wild segments are comically grandiose, but it does pull Carrie out of her funk. She listens in partway through the story, a little amused by Usopp's ridiculous tall tale and growing more entertained with every new absurdity he creates. By the time and she quotes, "Lizard has rescued the knight from the murderous princess after their asses," Carrie has just begun to let her hackles fall, a bit more at ease. She even adds a half-hearted reaction here and there when Usopp dramatically gestures for her to add her 2 cents. And by the time the story is wrapping up, something between the lizard finding her knight in salmon armor and the murderous princess turning into a goat, Carrie blurts, "We're really friends?" Her question gives pause to Usopp's bewildering story. He blinks at Carrie dumbly until his expression lights up and he completely shifts gears. "Of course we are. Were we not before, or like, did I do something to?" No. You didn't do anything. I'm just being stupid." Carrie waves off his concerns. And it's the first time that Carrie realizes that she was truly distracted from Zoro's whole situation. And it's with a delayed realization that Carrie seems to put the puzzle pieces together. Her expression doesn't quite flatten as much as turns dryly amused. "Zoro put you up to this, didn't he?" "Well, he did say that if possible tell you a story, but the friend thing is also a side thing." "Usopp," Carrie interrupts before he can continue to ramble. His mouth snaps shut and he gives her an anxious look only for her to smile kindly, "Thank you." It seemed her words bolstered something in Usopp as he puffed up much like a bird and began to blabber in earnest. Why, of course. How could the great Captain Usopp not help his greatest second mate when she is plagued by anxieties? His boisterous smile turns a little softer, "And I'd be a rather bad friend if I didn't try and do something." "Yeah," Carrie muses, head tilting back to lie against the back of the nest. The sky had started to purple throughout Usopp's tall tail. And there was less shuffling on deck, overall the mood turning to something quieter as everyone readied themselves for bed. Seeing her musings, Usopp quietly says, "You should go down and get some rest." And when Carrie turns to give him a look, he just gives a reassuring smile, "I got night watch covered." "You sure?" Carrie asked. Usopp scoffs like he's offended by her care. "Please. Like a little all-nighter is something I can't handle." Carrie snorts. Right. She starts for the ladder, climbing over Usopp as she goes. "Well, let me know if our most noble captain needs a break from his valiant efforts of vigil." "Oh, please." Usopp scoffs. "Don't assume so little of me." Carrie laughs with every rung she travels down. "Zoro he doesn't really know. But he just is. His flesh runs hot from sick, his skin damp with sweat. Clothes and sheets cling to him like desperate hands pulling. There is a tremble in body. His blood pumps and every sickening throb of his heart feels like a gunshot to his system. Over and over his body continues to live through the misery. Both forever and not long enough. Every breath drowning and yet also so parched for water. It is a contradiction born of disease and rot. And yet also, he is simply not. He sits in the dojo, a place both wrought with dreams and tragedy. He hears children and adults alike train. The clashing of swords and ambience unseen in this empty place. Yet still accompanied. Though absent, the sound of screaming from training can still be heard too, ringing metal and grunts of effort still singing in the uncanny. The walls once so familiar are almost fake in their presentation. The longer he looks at them the more they twist and warp before his eyes. Like maggots and mice clambering behind their structure, familiar now made unknown. The floor, similarly, is moving with every breath he takes. Thousands of strands of patterns screaming and undulating with every quaking breath he takes. The floor quakes and writhes, pulsating with mass beneath the boards. There is something there clawing to get out, and yet brought to rest by the familiar. Zoro is also feeling as though he were a contradiction. He feels ill, he feels worse than that even, and yet his hands look the same as he has always seen them. They do not quake even as he feels his skin crawl. There is sweat running down his skin, and yet he does not glisten. He feels as though at any time his vision will go black, and yet he is still vigilant in this waking thing. He blinks. Kuina is before him. She's older, and yet also not. It is both his friend he knew at the age she died and something older and what could have been. She does not warp like the room around them. She sits and stares at Zoro. Her eyes. There is a tea set in front of them. Kuina reaches for the pot, pouring them each a glass. It smells pungent. Wrong. Like something decayed and gone bad, and yet he takes another breath and it is replaced with something more floral. Each inhale and exhale trading between rancid and pleasant. A constant war with his senses. Her hands are small, smaller than he thinks they would be. They hold the glass cup carefully. Gently? No. Like something fragile? Still not quite. She's offering him a drink. Drink. Her voice is wrong. It's her voice, it's Tashiji's, and something else. Something else that makes Zoro's skin feel infinitesimally more sensitive. He feels hot and cold all at once. The room undulates with the simple word, as if reacting in eager anticipation, highlighting the command. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Her eyes. Zoro is holding the cup. It's tiny and feels warm in his palm despite its porcelain. Feels sticky. Again Kuina stares at him, patiently waiting for him to drink. Yet something inside him, something instinctual, tells him to wait. Drink. Again the room pulsates. And yet despite that, Zoro does not drink, a simple question forcing its way out of his throat. What are you? Her eyes. This thing is not his Kuina. The room's scent turns to a stomach-turning odor. The walls quake and the ambience of steel and grunts turns to groans, moans, and wails. There is another sound, something slimy and croaking, like wet entrails of a hunter's quarry, freshly emptied and left to decay. To rot. The thing smiles. It doesn't look right. It does not match her eyes. There are hands shaking Zoro awake. In his franticness he gasps. He's covered in sweat and sick and feels less than aware. His body is shaking. He feels an instinctual fright in his person that has come from hard-ingrained human instinct. Things animalistic and yet left for unknown purpose. The hands have yet to let go of his shoulders. His eyes frantically dart for the source, only to pause at the sight of his captain's red eyes. Red? No, that's the sickness. Luffy is staring at him. Luffy? He asks, his voice a rasp of misuse, like he's been screaming for hours on end and had no reprieve. There is a weight on his legs. He wants to look. You weren't here. His captain answers. His voice sounds wrong. It didn't sound like Luffy. Yet Zoro's mind cannot seem to comprehend this. Instead he looks around, confused for only the barest of a minute before remembering where he was and why he was here. He sees his companions strewn around the room in their various corners, holed up and snoozing while still keeping as close as they dared. His eyes dart to his legs and he finds a sleeping Carrie draped much like a clinging blanket. Her arms braced around one leg and snuggling it like a plush. The position looks less than comfortable, but she's content at least. By the snoring she must not have been that put off. Something about the sight puts his worries to rest, his hackles falling with a gentle sigh of relief. There is something wet on his face. Here, Luffy says, sounding much more like himself now. A tissue is thrust into his face. You have a nosebleed. Zoro takes the tissue, looking into his captain's coal eyes. Why had he ever thought them crimson? Wiping at his face and, oh yes, that is a nosebleed. He tosses the tissue aside and collapses back onto the bed, the dregs of sleep beginning to pull him down again. Would Kuina see him again? Would his Kuina go back to sleep? Luffy says, settling himself at Zoro's head and resting his own on his shoulder. Zoro doesn't argue. He does not dream of Kuina. He doesn't dream at all, he thinks. Though maybe he dreams of the sun? And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, share and donate for more videos.